Hey everybody, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. It's Dave, and I'm just jumping on to talk about my pick for the Audible book for the next little bit. I would love to share a book that I find inspiring, and in the show notes today is a link for you to go and check out the book that we're talking about on Audible. And if you use my link, I'll get a little bit of money back for that, and I appreciate that. That helps to go to support the podcast and the fees that are all associated with having a podcast and all that. And I'd love to take my wife out for dinner, to be quite honest. But if you go to Living the Next Chapter, and you will see more information about this book and the other books that I've recommended through the Audible format. And I love listening to books on Audible. So the book that we're going to recommend, I'll talk to you about it in a minute here on the Living the Next Chapter podcast. Thanks for being here. Here we go. So normally on these episodes, you would see a guest name for the episode title, and we would be jumping into the podcast and introducing our guest right now. I had about 25 minutes left in my hosting availability for this month. So I thought I would get this episode in here and use up that remaining 25 minutes of my hosting instead of it just disappearing, because we pay for this hosting and I wanted to use every minute we can. So I wanted to share a little bit about a book that I've been listening to on Audible. It's called Storyworthy. It's by Matthew Dix. And the title of the book is Storyworthy: Engage, Teach, Persuade, and Change Your Life Through the Power of Storytelling. Now, I love storytelling. It, for me, is the thing that helps me to gravitate to a host, to an author, to a podcast, to a speaker, a coach. When someone can take a theme, a topic, something that needs to be just disseminated out into us so that we can understand what they're talking about, but then wraps it in a story and takes us on a journey. And what I love about Matthew Dix's book is he helps you craft a good story. And he actually gives you great illustrations of what maybe a bad story or a weak story is, and how you can make it better. What you can do to increase your story writing, storytelling ability. So Matthew Dix, if you don't know who this is, Matthew Dix is a 5-time Moth GrandSLAM winner and best-selling novelist. And he wants to help you tell a great story. Now, these Grand Slams, Matthew talks about this in his book. I don't want to give it all away because I'd love you to go listen to the book. But these storytelling events are called Moth GrandSLAMs, and you get called up on stage and you have to tell a story in front of a bunch of people. Think of being a comedian called up to tell jokes, or a musician called up to play your instrument, or a singer called up just to do karaoke. In this situation, you're called up to tell a story, and you need to take the audience through a journey. And Matthew talks about his first ever time when he went to a story like this Moth GrandSLAM, and he sat in the audience. And I guess you have to submit your name to be drawn and called up. And he was saying in the book, again, I'm not going to give it all away, but in the book he's saying he was just dreading the idea of having his name called. And as they went through every name in the book, he's getting close to the end, and he's breathing a sigh of relief because his name wasn't called until the last name was called, and it was his name. And yeah, so he shares the very real experience of facing his fears, getting up in front of a bunch of people, and sharing his story. And what I love about this is Matthew really unpacks for you how to create a story and take people on a journey. So there's a little clip from the book so you can hear what this sounds like when you grab the Audible version of the book. But here's a little clip from Storyworthy just so you can kind of hear and get a sense for what I'm talking about, and hear a little bit from Matthew as he reads the book to you. I love hearing the book in the author's own words because it just adds a different flavor to it all. So here's a little bit from Matthew from the book Storyworthy: Engage, Teach, Persuade, and Change Your Life Through the Power of Storytelling. Here's Matthew.
This is Audible.
Storyworthy: Engage, Teach, Persuade, and Change Your Life Through the Power of Storytelling by Matthew Dix.
She told me the story of the night when she and I went to Chili's for dinner, our first meal alone, before our school's talent show. Just so we're clear, this was not a date. Maybe I wanted it to be a date, but at that time I thought Alicia was out of my league. I still think this today, please don't tell her. Alicia and I were fellow teachers and slowly becoming friends, but we were both involved with other people at the time. We were technically unavailable. Also, Chili's was one of the closest restaurants to our school. My point? I didn't take Alicia on a first date to Chili's. I'm not that guy, okay? Alicia explained to the woman that over the course of our dinner, she had asked me some questions about myself. We'd known each other for a couple years by then, but we didn't know much about each other personally. When I'm asked a question, I tell a story, so I told some stories that night. I was still more than 7 years away from taking the stage and telling my first official story, but even back then, I was always ready and willing to share my life with others, warts and all. Alicia told the woman, that was the night I started falling for Matt. Listening to his stories, I realized that he wasn't like anyone I had ever met before, and I knew I wanted to hear more. I liked the way he told a story. Beautiful, right? I found the perfect spouse through storytelling. Right after the beauty of that moment washed over me, I quickly shifted to annoyance. By then, I had been performing on stage and teaching storytelling for a few years. I had made a name for myself in the storytelling world. I'd attracted interest from businesses, universities, nonprofits, and performers. Knowing all this, why had she waited until now to inform me that my storytelling had been the key to her heart? I told her that the story about falling in love with me through storytelling fit perfectly into my personal narrative and explained how useful it could have been for me for the past couple of years of teaching and performing. You're telling me that I found the perfect wife through storytelling? That's like a baseball player hitting a home run into the right field bleachers that's caught by the woman he eventually marries. It's amazing. How could you keep that from me? I'm not in the business of helping you construct your personal narrative, she said. She's lucky I love her. But you see the point, right? Even before I was telling stories on stage and thinking of myself as a storyteller, the ability to tell a good story was helping me immensely. So let's be clear that when I talk about storytelling, I'm speaking about personal narrative, true stories told by the people who live them. This is very different than the traditional fable or folktale that many people associate with the word storytelling. While folktales and fables are entertaining and can teach us about universal truths and important life lessons, there is power in personal storytelling that folktales and fables will never possess. A folktale or a fable would have never convinced Alicia that I was the love of her life. My friends would not routinely invite me to play golf if I promised them a well-told folktale in between swings. I would not be hired for a job by answering questions with folktales. Nonprofits, corporations, universities, and school districts would not be able to improve their image and messaging through fables. You can't become the life of the party by telling a good folktale. More importantly, folktales and fables do not create the same level of connection between storyteller and audience as a personal story. I have never listened to someone tell a folktale and felt more deeply connected to the storyteller as a result. I may have loved the story and admired the storyteller's skill and expertise, and I might have been highly entertained, but I have never felt that I knew the storyteller any better at the end of the story. The storyteller who tells folktales and fables is a highly developed, highly skilled delivery mechanism, often more entertaining than television, radio, or a YouTube video, but never revealing, vulnerable, or authentic.
So that was Matthew from Storyworthy, a little clip just to give you an idea of what the book is about. And again, I love the Audible version of it. To listen to the audio version is great. And you can listen to the book while you're doing something else. Pop it in the car. You can throw it on while you're at work or when you're supposed to be working, but you're not. You're listening. Sorry, but yeah, it's a great way to consume books, and I love Audible for that. So, reading from the Audible listing on Amazon for this book, it says, whether we realize it or not, we are always telling stories. On a first date or job interview, at a sales presentation or therapy appointment, with family or friends, we are constantly narrating events and interpreting emotions and actions. In this compelling book, storyteller extraordinaire Matthew Dix presents wonderfully straightforward and engaging tips and techniques for constructing, telling, and polishing stories that will hold the attention of your audience, no matter how big or how small. He shows that anyone can learn to be an appealing storyteller, that everyone has something story-worthy to express, and perhaps most important, that the act of creating and telling a tale is a powerful way of understanding and enhancing your own life. As an author, we sit down at our computer, or tablet, or piece of paper and a pencil and a pen, and we start writing. The idea of crafting a story can seem daunting. But this book will really give you some insights and open your mind to maybe things that you can do in your writing process. And I'm really looking forward to you experiencing Storyworthy. I would love to hear your feedback on this Audible book. And again, the link in the show notes is an affiliate link. And what that means is I'm registered with Audible and I'm registered with Amazon, so that if you go through my link in the show notes and you access the book, I will receive a small remuneration for that. And I really appreciate that because, as you've noticed in all of the podcast episodes we've done, all 150 plus episodes, we've never had a commercial for anybody. We're not selling mattresses or supplements or any of that. We've been doing this all for free. And my wife Jennifer and I have been paying for all of the hosting and all of those things, and not expecting you to pay for any of it. That's not the reason for the podcast. But if you do use our link, we appreciate that, and the money will go back towards our hosting fees and all of that. And we appreciate you supporting us by using our link. So we'll have a link in the show notes for Amazon Canada and a link in the show notes for Amazon US, so that you can click and go through from there. So it doesn't cost you anything to use our link, and it'll work great for you. And I would love to get your feedback on Storyworthy. And I'm going to be doing more of these audio suggested books for you, and encouraging you to go check them out. And love to get your feedback again on Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. Engage, teach, persuade, and change your life through the power of storytelling. Thanks for checking out the links in the show notes. And in the links there as well as links to our Living the Next Chapter website. And here's some information for you as well. We do have a Facebook group for the podcast. And in that Facebook group, it's new. So it's small, but we'd love to have you join us. In there, past guests are invited to join us and come into the group and promote their books and promote their new writings and make connections with listeners and readers. If you're enjoying the podcast and you just want to connect with some of the great guests we've had on in the past, join us. And again, the link's in the show notes, but come on over to the Facebook group and help us build this community around the amazing authors that have come on the show to date. And we would love to get your feedback and your interaction over there on this in our Facebook group. So links again in the show notes for that. Would love to have you come and check that out. The other thing I could really use your help with is there an author that you really would love to hear from? An author that inspires you, and you have all of their books, and anytime they write something, you're just the first one in line to pick it up, and you would love to hear their voice on this podcast. Let me know. There's a SpeakPipe thing on our website. It's a little microphone. You can click it, and you can record up to 90 seconds of a message. And if you make a mistake, you can just do it again. It's fine. You can do as many times as you want. And then what happens is that comes to me in an email, in an audio format. And I can bring your audio into the podcast. I can also then use your audio clip where you're calling out your favorite author. And I can then reach out to that author with your suggestion of having them on this podcast. And I can say, listen, Bob or Amy that listens to the podcast, they would really love to hear you on the podcast. Would you be interested in coming on as a guest? And it's a nice little thing where I can say that you helped create the content for this podcast by making your suggestions. So head over to the website, livingthenextchapter.com. And again, you can use the SpeakPipe. You can do email from there. You can find us on our social accounts and send me a direct message, whatever works for you, whatever you like the best. I love the audio because then I can hear your amazing voice. So that's me. I'm a podcaster. I love hearing people's voices. So join the conversation. And again, head over to all the stuff in the show notes. And we'd love to have you there and connect with you over there and hear about your suggestions for a great author to be on our show. Can you do that for me? Really? Yeah, you could do this. So I'd love to have you join that. So head over there, do that. Again, thank you for being with us for over 150 plus episodes. So you know, this is being recorded the end of February right now. All of March is already recorded, edited, and complete, and all stacked up in a row to come out in March. So I'm already working on April releases for the podcast. I probably have another 50 to 60 interviews to do in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And we're having some of the most amazing people come onto this podcast. I'm thrilled by who's lined up to come onto the show. It's amazing. So there's a lot of great content coming up. What I would love from you as well, and I know I'm asking a lot from you today, but again, I don't get the opportunity to do this kind of episode very often, is I would love for you to help share the podcast. There's a lot of people who don't even listen to podcasts or have no idea that this podcast even exists. And by you sharing it, it's the same as recommending a movie on Netflix or a TV show on television. And you go to your friend and you're like, oh, you got to check out this show. I love it. I've watched every episode. I binged it all. It's my favorite show on Netflix or Prime or whatever. Could you do that for my podcast? Could you pick an episode that really spoke to you and the guest and the author really spoke to you, or you found a new book because of this podcast and now you're following an author that you had never heard of until you heard of them here? Could you share that episode with somebody in your circle? And if they don't know how to use an app to listen to podcasts, can you show them? Can you bring your phone out or get their phone in your hands and actually have them subscribe to the show, push the buttons for them, and explain to them that they can actually have all the new episodes show up on their device as they're released, and it's completely free. Some people get nervous about podcasting, thinking that podcasts cost money for the listener. There are options for that in the future. Yes, that's a possibility, but This podcast is free. And like I've mentioned earlier, we don't have commercials. So we're creating all of this for you for free. And we really appreciate your support and sharing it with others so that we can spread the word and grow the community, have more guests come on. My authors, when they come on and we do a pre-interview, one of the questions they ask me is, Dave, how big is your audience? And how engaged is your audience? And that's the two things that my guests want to know. If they want to know, if they come on this show, that you're going to listen and that you're going to share their episode because they're giving their time to come here and be a guest on this show. So by you helping me share this podcast, by you helping me share great interviews with great authors and connecting people who have never heard the show before, that helps to get even more authors and amazing authors to come in the future. So you have a direct impact on the quality of this show and who we can have on the show by making suggestions and by sharing the show and helping it grow. So could you do that for me as well? I know I've asked a lot from you, and I appreciate you being here. And I don't want this to be a big commercial by any means, but I just want you to know that's what we're looking for as we go into the springtime of 2023, is we're looking to grow the show, attract more listeners to the podcast, get more great guests to come on and talk about their journey, get your suggestions for great authors, and then adding things like Storyworthy here in the podcast so that you can listen to this book and help support the show financially by using our link to grab this book. And I really appreciate that. So thank you for being part of Living the Next Chapter. More great episodes coming up soon. And again, we're doing this all for you. And I appreciate you so much. I really do. And we'll talk soon. Thank you so much for supporting Living the Next Chapter. Go get that Storyworthy book. There's a link. Click the link. Thanks, guys. Talk soon. Cheers. Bye.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.